Show that it is 11 a.m., so we'll get started on our 11 a.m. Sunday, July 7th briefing on Tropical Storm Beryl. I am Paul Ura. I am the warning coordination meteorologist for the Austin San Antonio National Weather Service office. Logistics as normal, this is being recorded. In addition, if you have any questions, there is a questions feature on the GoToWebinar that you can type in your questions. I have that window up. So as we go along, if you have a question, go ahead and type it in. And then also at the very end of the briefing, I'll give you a couple of minutes to type in any questions if you have them, and then I'll answer them to the entire audience with that. So anyway, so let's get started. A couple things have happened since the last time we did this briefing yesterday. Tropical Storm Beryl has increased slightly in strength, now 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm. It is continuing to move northwest toward the Texas coast as forecast, and is still forecast to become a hurricane by landfall, basically, which will be sometime late tonight into the pre-dawn hours on Monday. The timing of landfall has sped up just slightly by at least a few hours, to where they do think it's going to be kind of somewhere around, I think the latest was somewhere between like midnight and 3 a.m., something like that, onto the middle Texas coast. And it kind of shifted east by just a few miles up the middle Texas coast. There are tropical storm warnings up for Lavaca and DeWitt counties, and we have added Fayette County into that. We'll explain that. Heavy rain is still the biggest threat. We've lowered totals a little bit in our region to 3 to 7 inches, but a flood watch is still in effect for that area over the far eastern areas of south central Texas. And of course, with the tropical storm warnings that we have up, those areas can get gusts in excess of 50 miles per hour. And an additional threat that we have across that region is some isolated tornadoes. So overall, this is kind of, especially for our far eastern and southeastern sections of south central Texas, including the Fayette, Lavaca, and DeWitt counties out there. Basically, you see the wind threats and the flooding rain. The river and the tornadoes are still quite low. We have a lot of room in our rivers right now, and so that's why even with the 3 to 7 inches that we could get, we're not expecting any dramatic sort of river flooding. That would be mainly kind of more like local and urban flooding if that kind of comes through. Here's the latest plot and the latest forecast from the Hurricane Center. This was the 10 a.m. advisory. You can kind of see that where the position is now, marked with the X, and then it should be strengthening into a Category 1 hurricane before making landfall, and already be kind of into northeast Texas by late in the day tomorrow. So our overall impact for our region of south central Texas will be a fairly narrow window from late tonight into basically the early afternoon hours, probably tomorrow on Monday. So there is still an increasing risk of rip currents and high surf and everything along the Texas coast. We're still highlighting that in our key messages, but everything else, this is kind of a good slide that you guys can use out in social media as well. This is what we've been putting out on social media as well as our webpage. Again, the good news is that they're not tracking anything back behind Beryl. So it looks like once this kind of exits the region and exits East Texas, we'll have a little bit of a gap here without anything tropical wise to kind of look at or to worry about. Here's the latest satellite loop that we have from Beryl this morning. It's actually getting pretty decently close to the Texas coast. I'll show a radar loop here in a second, which shows some of the rain bands kind of wrapping around it. What you can kind of see a little bit on this satellite image, there is a lot of dry air in the southern Bay of Campeche, and it is wrapping all the way around into the system. That is typically not very good for hurricane formation, or at least very rapid strengthening. The waters are still very, very warm out there. So of course, that is one of the aspects as to why they think the tropical storm may in fact strengthen to a hurricane prior to landfall. But it has a couple of things going against it, especially for making it very large. So right now it's very small, and they think it's going to actually remain fairly small. Some of it may actually be because of all that dry air that's kind of what we call entraining or getting wrapped around into it. Here are the rain bands that are already starting. This is from Corpus Christi radar. The circulation is way down here to the far south right corner of the image in the loop. But you can see these feeder bands and rain bands already kind of making their way onto the Texas coast. Later on here in a few minutes, when we talk about the tornado threat, the main tornado threat today will come from some of these bands if they do make it into, let's say, Lavaca, DeWitt counties, maybe even further inland a little bit. That's where we would have a small little tornado threat. That tends to be where these small tornadoes set up on the rain bands as they wrap around the central system of the cyclone. As far as probabilities of wind and how big those probabilities are for getting tropical storm force winds, you can see the graphic here. We're expecting already by Sunday tonight that the risk of getting tropical storm force wind gusts are already going to be hitting the Texas coast, and then inland pushing probably in the pre-dawn hours. And so again, that's why we have the tropical storm warning up for DeWitt, Lavaca, and Fayette counties. There is an outside shot that we may have to expand that. Our hope is that as the forecast becomes even more exact of where Beryl is going to go and the strength, that maybe we'll even be able to kind of tone down some of our wording and maybe even take some folks out of the tropical storm warning. But way too early for that. We'll wait a couple more forecast cycles to kind of make any sort of further decisions. But fluctuations are always possible, so we have to be kind of on our toes about adding and subtracting, and then getting as many counties into the watches and warnings that we need to be the preparedness that we want. Here is a graphic kind of showing the 3 counties that we currently have under the tropical storm warnings: Fayette County, Lavaca County, and DeWitt counties. You can see off to the south and off to the east, we have more additional counties in the Corpus Christi region, as well as the Houston region as well. Obviously, anytime you have wind gusts of 50 miles per hour or greater, you have the possibility of having some sort of power outages, some tree branches down, etc. So those sort of impacts are going to be there. We do think that the strongest winds could arrive by early Monday morning tomorrow, but the threat would then quickly be decreasing as the system heads northeast. So by late Monday afternoon, typically most of the higher wind gust threat should be gone. Along the coast, they're still talking about some storm surge, 4 to 6 feet in the middle Texas coast, and 3 to 5 feet down to the south and further north up, including like the Galveston Bay area. Rainfall totals have come down just a bit. It's picking up its forward speed. Typically, the faster the storm is moving, the less amount of rainfall will be able to fall, as well as some of that dry air that's being kind of wrapped around the system. It's not becoming any sort of catastrophic looking flood event as of right now. So again, those highest rainfall totals will be primarily east of Interstate 37, east of Interstate 35, and primarily confined to the eastern half of Texas and along and just to the right of the path of Beryl. Here's a closer up view. We've toned down these rainfall totals just a bit, especially along Interstate 35. To be honest, areas along and west of 35 probably got the best rainfalls actually yesterday, where we had several instances of 2 to 3+ inch rain amounts with those thunderstorms yesterday afternoon and evening. For the next 24 hours, it looks like areas off to the far east, again, where we have the flood watches out, which I'll show in a second. This is primarily where our heaviest concern is for the rainfall totals. And again, we're not talking about major river flooding. We'd be talking about more localized flooding, urban flooding, low water crossings, kind of the flooding that we're most used to kind of be dealing with here. Here is a graphic showing the flood watch areas down to our southeast along the Texas coast, off to the east around Houston, and then including 4 counties: Lee County, Fayette County, Lavaca County, and DeWitt County across our jurisdiction. Again, locally heavy rain, tropical downpours, just like we had kind of yesterday. But again, more localized flooding is what we think for our region. There tends to be a really strong gradient of rainfall totals as you head west of a system. And so that's why we're not expecting much across I-35, but those totals will increase as you get closer to the center of the path and to the east of the path of where Beryl is going to go. As mentioned with the radar image that I showed, the tornado threat is going to be there a little bit. It's not ideal for us. It's much higher off to the east and southeast, especially up the middle and upper Texas coast today and early tomorrow. That main threat for isolated tornadoes with those rain bands would be here primarily overnight, technically this afternoon too, if we get some of those rain bands already affecting parts of our eastern areas, but primarily tonight and into the early hours of Monday before the system moves off to the north. So key takeaways, our confidence is slowly still increasing, and that's mainly just because the forecast track really hasn't changed much in the last 2 days. The threats and impacts across our far eastern areas, again, include the locally heavy rain of maybe 3 to 7 inches, the wind gusts in excess of 50 miles an hour, and because of those two things, the flood watch and the tropical storm warning have been issued for that region. Again, areas of I-35, I think will primarily miss out on most everything, but continue to monitor. The system still has time to strengthen quite considerably given the sea surface temperatures out there. Some of the models, some of the small scale hurricane models are still having a pretty good jump in intensity just prior to landfall. So areas along the coast, they're actually telling them to prepare possibly for a Category 2. That's typically how the emergency managers, especially on the coast, tend to prepare for that. You know, they basically prepare at least one category higher than what is forecast, because that's typically within the error of what the Hurricane Center forecast is for intensity. So just continue to monitor, and of course we could make some adjustments on not only the flood watch, but also the tropical storm warnings by this afternoon or even by tonight when the new forecasts come out for Beryl, and we see what it does for the rest of the afternoon on radar, but then also satellite imagery as well. So that's all I had. I'll be looking for some questions now. Can we talk about the wind potential for Austin and I-35 corridor? Is it likely to see tropical storm strength winds in that area? The answer is no. Right now, we're not expecting any tropical storm force strength sustained winds in across the Austin I-35 corridor. To be honest, the wind gust that we were getting yesterday with those thunderstorms is probably the highest gust that we would see with anything in the next 24 to 48 hours across the Austin San Antonio area. Any mandatory or voluntary evacuation? I am not sure. I have not heard of any, but again, that's more along the Texas coast, and I have not heard of any of those. You'd have to honestly check with the local officials down along the coast, Donovan, to kind of see if anybody has been asked to leave. I'm not aware of that. One of our school districts contacts us about the conditions for students going to the state convention in Houston tomorrow. Do you know any idea of how much rain is expected that way? Generally, they're forecasting 5 to 10 inches of rain, Trey, across that path and just east of the path, with some locally higher totals. So the threat of heavy rain increases as you head on Interstate 10 and Highway 71 and 290 as you go into the Houston region. So yes, they are basically driving right into a possible hurricane tomorrow, or at least a tropical storm after it makes landfall. So that is not ideal, and they should be checking, especially the Houston National Weather Service website and their statements and their warnings for the latest information in that particular region. Let's see, Dub is saying San Patricio County ordered voluntary evacuation yesterday at noon. Okay, thank you, Dub. That was voluntary. Any chance that Beryl can stay traveling northwest and not turn? John, that of course anything is possible. I would say it'd be extremely rare at this point, knowing how consistent the models are. I would think that threat is extremely low, that anything would change dramatically from the middle Texas coast sort of landfall point. Okay, Chief Norris is saying that Refugio and Aransas counties have evacuation orders, but not much compliance. Okay, thank you, Chief. Okay, last couple seconds for any additional questions. Originally, I had scheduled these webinars all the way through Tuesday. Knowing how fast Beryl may be getting out of here, most likely the 5 p.m. webinar today and the 2 webinars tomorrow are probably going to be all we're going to have to do, hopefully. But anyway, I will get this recording out to everybody. I'll get the slides out to everybody within the hour, and then we will see everybody at 5 o'clock for another update. So thank you, everybody, for listening in.